Welcome back, it's Jerry with the Happy Hootie. We've got a project today. Now here on the Happy Hootie, we always try to save you time and money for you and your family, and that's one of the big things that we go for here on the channel. Our family is a family of 5, and we've had an old water heater that we've had in our basement. It's going on close to 15 years now. This thing has gotten old, and it's starting to make a lot of weird noises because it's got a lot of buildup in it. And normally you could try to clean that out, but because this thing is so old, I don't think it's really worth the time or the energy of the process to have to clean this thing out. So what we're going to be doing today is I'm going to be replacing this water heater and showing you how we do it. Now this is not going to be a direct swap. Currently we've got a water heater that is piped by natural gas. We're going to be changing things up a bit. We've got a lot of solar here on the property, and so what I've decided to do is upgrade this to a hybrid hot water heater that runs electric using a heat pump. So that's going to complicate things a bit because I'm going to need to remove the gas and I'm going to be needing to attach the electric. Now I've already got an electric line run and spooled up over here. You can hear how noisy this thing is. Let's go ahead and let me show you the behemoth water heater that we're getting ready to install in here, because this is a 50-gallon. We're going to be installing a 75-gallon hybrid that is taller than I am, and it is a beast. So stick with us. You're going to want to see how this project turns out. So to give you an idea of the grand size of this 75-gallon hybrid electric water heater, I had to stand next to it to show you that this thing is going to be a beast. So if you don't have room, you need to make sure that you measure your closet, measure your doorway, measure the space around it, because you will need a little bit of space for this thing to be able to sit in there and be able to pipe in properly. We have that space downstairs, so I felt confident we could do it. Now, getting this moved down to the basement may be a little bit of a problem, but I've got a wife and a dolly. I think I can get it done. Before disconnecting or working on any gas appliance in your home, it's a great idea to locate your gas meter, and next to your gas meter there will be a shutoff. In our particular case, it's here. This will shut off the gas to the entire house, so you'll need to make sure that that is shut off to where you're no longer allowing gas to supply to your house, and this will prevent any further possibilities of damage occurring whenever you go to disconnect this, and won't allow gas just to go flowing through your house. The other thing we're going to need to do before we get started working on a major water appliance is know where your shutoffs are. Now, if you have a shutoff that is on the actual appliance you're working on, that's probably for the best. If you don't, or you're unsure, just locate the main for your entire house and just shut off the main for the entire house. That way you know no further water is going to be getting to that appliance. With the gas shut off outside, we know that there's no longer any gas flowing to here. We're going to go ahead and turn this thing completely off. And we're going to go ahead and attach a drain so that we can go ahead and start draining this out. By locating a appliance that is at an upper level, you can open it up to allow air to get back into the system. This will allow it to flow all out and make sure everything gets drained out of the system before we get started. Waiting for this to drain is usually one of the most time-consuming parts, but there are a couple things we can do as we're waiting for this to drain so that it makes it easier to move. And that is going to be disconnecting the gas and getting it capped off and prepped and ready. In disconnecting the gas, again, we've got it shut off outside. You're going to look around for, typically they have a compression fitting somewhere connecting these things all together. In our case, it's here. So I've gone ahead and loosened it up. And then you're going to disconnect it from your actual water heater. Now, I probably won't need to take this part off. So since we're not going to be using the gas and I need to have room to get this electric hybrid water heater in here, I've gone ahead and bought a foot-long little stud piece that's going to go thread into that 3/4 inch pipe in the ceiling. And I bought a cap that's going to go on the bottom of this. that's going to end up screwing onto the bottom of that, so it just caps it off about a foot out of the ceiling, so it gets it out of the way, but it still leaves us access where we can use it in the future should anybody ever decide to do that. And to be putting all that together, we're going to be using some threaded pipe sealant that's going to go on there just to make sure none of that gas can leak out. I can see up there that it's just connected to an elbow right there in the ceiling, so we're just going to turn it and get it twisted out of there to remove this piece to get it out of the way. And then I'm going to be replacing it with that little piece up in the ceiling. This is some threaded pipe sealant that you can put on, kind of glob it on. And what it's got is a little Teflon in there and other little pieces that are in there that's going to seal this on to not allow any liquid or gas to come out of these threads. And you can use the threaded pipe tape. I just happen to have some of this, so that's why I'm going to use that. You're then going to put your cap on the end of this and thread it on. Our water heater was piped a little bit weird because the previous owners had installed a large jacuzzi tub that they needed to get water to faster, so they've piped a secondary off of this drain line, which is kind of an odd way to do it in my opinion, but we're not going to be needing that anymore. So I bought this is called Aqualock, I think. It was a little brand of the same brand as like a SharkBite fitting or a Gator Bite fitting. It's a real simple way to cap a line, and since this is a little I believe it's a 1/2 inch line, copper line, about a 1/2 inch plug. So I'm just going to go ahead, again, I'm going to leave all the pipe, but I'm going to go ahead and cut it off and then cap it so I can remove this piece too, because again, we're not going to need it. You got that cut back, go ahead and just give it a light sanding here at the end, just make sure you get anything cleared off of there, get any burrs kind of cleared off there. You also want to make sure that it's pretty round around the end of there. And then we're going to go ahead and just take this and stick it on there and just shove it on. Like that. We've capped the gas line, and I've capped the auxiliary water that we didn't need. The other thing we're not going to need, because we're not using gas any longer in here, is going to be to remove this vent pipe. This vent pipe is meant so when it's combusting the gas, it's got a way to, evacuate the waste gas out of the room. But since the new one's electric, we're not going to need that. So to remove that, there's a couple of screws that are holding this on down here, and there's a couple of them that are holding it on up there at the top. And we're just going to remove that one. I'm going to remove a couple that are up here. And this pipe will slide out of here and we can go ahead and remove it. Got the pipes out of the way. Now this has been draining for a while, but it is still draining. So I can still see that there's water coming out, but it's drained down far enough. All the water's had time to come out of the house, and it's just slowly draining down into here. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these pipes too. Now I don't want to cut them back too far. One, because I need to have room to attach onto, and two, because I've got an auxiliary line here that runs to our humidification system on the house that runs to our HVAC, and I want to keep that. So I'm just going to cut it just past where this fitting is so that I can replace it with all new fittings, and then we'll go ahead and remove these and then wait for this to finish draining, and then we'll be ready to pop the old one out. My wife asked me a good question just a second ago and asked, why am I not just unscrewing this end and just screwing the new end on? And that's a good question. You can certainly do that. I am going to, because of where these connections are on the new water heater, I'm going to be putting a new fitting on here that's going to convert the copper over to PEX. Now you can get one that screws in that does the same thing, but while I was buying all these fittings, I went ahead and just bought the Gator Bite fittings that just lock directly onto this and give it a new seal to where it don't have to use any kind of a pipe threaded tape or anything, and so that's what I'm going to be using on those, which is why I'm cutting it back beyond where the existing fitting is. It's a 300-pound water heater, so it is heavy. So either get some help and use an appliance dolly, which certainly helps. But these are dollies that are meant to move like refrigerators and things like that. So maybe something like this shouldn't be as bad. Once you get it strapped on, you've got a little more control, and you can tilt it back and just wheel it where you need it to go. Got it all drained out completely, which is great because sometimes it gets stuck there at the bottom. Disconnected the drain. Everything else is disconnected. You can see how much lighter this is now to move this around. It should not be any big deal to move this, but we're going to hook on a dolly, get this old one out of here so we can clean up the room and start putting the new one back in. Got it initially positioned in there, and what a bear it was to get it in there. But once we got it to the edge here, we had it set on the pan and just slid the whole thing in and turned it to get it adjusted where we can then pipe the drain over for that. It'll be a little bit awkward trying to get the inlets we had here to connect to the appropriate spots over here, but I've got some PEX line and some fittings that's a little flexible, which is going to help out with that. This is centered in the room as good as I could get it. I still have access to the control panel as well as to adjust the elements in here if need be, as well as access to the blow off and access to the electrical shutoff. To start piping this thing back together, we're going to be using some PEX line, which is this 3/4 inch flexible line here. It's a good alternative to copper anymore because one, it's fairly cheap and it's pretty easy to work with, but you do have to have the right tools to be able to do it. And that's going to require a type of crimper. This one uses the copper crimp rings, which are these that you buy in a pack of 5, 10, 25, about extra more than I'd need for that, just because if you buy them in bulk, they're typically cheaper. The tool's not the cheapest. If you're going to be using it again, it's a good idea to have one on hand. If you're not going to be using it again, see if you can borrow one from somebody or borrow one from work like I did. And then it's a good idea to have a way to either use sandpaper or a cleaning tool for your copper fittings. And again, your pipe cutter, which you can use to cut the copper like we did. I've also used it before to cut this PEX line, although you can also use a Sawzall to cut the PEX line as well. And you're going to have a various assortment of different fittings to be able to use elbows and different fittings on here. I went ahead and bought all the fittings and everything that I would need to do this entire water heater project for about $100 at Menards. I also went with more expensive fittings like these just because it made it easier, because they're the compression fittings you just push on and don't have to worry about using that paste or anything on there that will connect the PEX directly into the copper. So I'm going to go ahead and get started cutting these and getting them put on, and we'll kind of update you as we go. I use the push fittings up there to attach the copper to the PEX. You can see them back behind there. On these inlets on this, they're actually fixed, and it specifically says on there, do not remove them. They're attached in there specifically into the tank, and you're not to remove those. They are a threaded 3/4 inch fitting. So just to make it the same, I'm going to go ahead and use these. They go from a threaded to where you can attach it onto a PEX in these. This bottom one has a little bit of sealant on it already that came with it, but I don't ever trust it. You can never have too much. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of extra sealant onto this one, and the one up above doesn't have any sealant, but I'm going to put some on there as well. And I'm going to go ahead and put this on there and get it started, and then I'm going to crank it down with the pipe wrench. And you got to keep an eye on this line, make sure that it doesn't move, because you don't want to be twisting this so tight that you're trying to tighten the inside of that pipe there. What I'm doing here is using this pipe cutter, which again, you can use a Sawzall or something else to cut this. They even have a special tool just to cut PEX. I just don't happen to have one. And I'm going to cut 4 little stub pieces like that I can add in as attachments in there before I add my elbows, and then cut the long pieces to put in there. And I'll have to measure out how long I'll need for that. Each one of these fittings just screwed on, but they also come with a little plastic, looks like a, I don't know, top hat, I guess. They're meant for shoving in the end of this PEX line before you then shove it into here to give it a good seal. And you're going to go ahead and just shove it in all the way like that, where it locks in place. That gives us a little stub piece that we can now go ahead and attach onto and run our right angle so that we can get it up there. I'm going to do that on all these so that we're ready to move on to the next step. Next thing we're going to do is get these elbows put on all these fittings so that they can get turned around. To do that, you've got these PEX copper rings that's going to work with our crimping tool here. You're going to slide those on over the end of that pipe, and again, all 3/4 inch stuff we're going with here. You're going to shove this in into the end of this, with where it needs to be. Make sure that it gets all the way in there. And then you're going to line this PEX thing up here, and we're going to crimp around the top of it. I know it may be difficult to see. And that will lock that in place over there. That will not allow that to leak. It'll lock that around these. This has got little ridges in the back of this, and it clamps that pipe around those ridges, which then keeps it from leaking. So again, just to show you again how this works from a different angle, you've got these copper pieces, slide it over where you need it to go. You're going to take this elbow, and we're going to shove it on the end of this. It'll be a tight fit. It'll shove all the way into that PEX piece, and then the ring will slide over where that can fit around those teeth. And then using this specialized tool that goes around and puts equal pressure around this entire ring, you're going to lock it in place and just clamp it down until it locks all the way in place. And it crimps that ring and pushes that down there on that so that won't leak out of that fitting. I know it's close up in my face. Okay, you can either measure, this is the hot side here, because I've got the cold tapped in to run the other line, so I remember this is the hot one. This is the hot outlet here. So you can either measure the distance between the two, or you can just eyeball it by holding it up here and just cutting it by guessing by golly there. So I'm just going to mark it off with my thumb, mark it, and then I'm going to use this cutter and cut us a piece. All right, we are nearing the end. We've got our hot and cold lines connected. This one requires a couple of additional steps. Don't probably need the paste on this piece here, but what I've got is, since this is the hybrid, it's got the condenser unit up here, so it's actually got a drain out here at the side that you need to pipe out to allow the distilled water that this creates to be able to get to a drain. And so it's threaded. They do sell other parts that you can use to go ahead and connect this drain, but since we're already working with the PEX anyway, I'm going to go ahead and attach this in here and then just connect our PEX line into this and run it into the drain, which will work fine. It does say just to hand tighten this one only. Again, probably didn't need the threaded paste on this one, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway and get it pointed down. And then we'll get the PEX on there and run that down. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I've got this piece here that came already pre-threaded with a drain pipe that's going to shoot down into this pan. Of course, we've got to cut it, and then it just screws into the bottom of this. So we're going to knock both of those things out. We've got the water on, and you've got to do that and check for leaks and fill the entire tank up, and then go ahead and bleed the lines in your house so that you know that this thing is filled with water before you even start working on the electric. Now, you do that because once you start working on this electric and get it turned on, it's going to heat up the heating elements inside the tank. And if it is not full of water, those heating elements can burn out because they're meant to be submerged in water. So you want to make sure this is filled with water first. And there's actually a little sticker here that's over the top of the electric that says, again, do not make your electrical connections, do not turn power on until you have performed all the following steps. Verify that all the water lines are connected, cold water supply valve is open, run the hot water faucets, water tank is completely filled. So we've done all that, and I've got it on, and all the lines and bled out and everything else, and now it's just time to connect the electric. So you pop the cap off of this, and in here you've got your two lines. They've already got the ground connected, and then they've got a couple of little feeder lines that actually run to this CTA adapter. This is not on all water heaters, but basically this just lets this talk with the grid. If there's any kind of problems or anything, this can shut the electric down in this without causing any kind of damage or anything. So we're going to go ahead and wire those in with these as well. I've got my pigtail that's run over here to our connection here. Now I have already pulled out the little breaker connection out of there, and I've got the breaker turned off outside, so there's no power even to this anyway, but I'm going ahead and pull that out there just for extra safety. And we're going to go ahead and feed this in through this, because this is what's going to eventually screw down onto here. So I'm going to feed these through this and then start connecting all the lines together. I'm going to take off the extra end caps off of this guy. I'm going to be saving those wire nuts because we're going to need those for later. We're going to go ahead and feed this down through the top. of that. But before I do, I need to have my little lock piece here. Through there so it's in there like that. And I got to feed the lock piece over the end to secure it. Like that. So basically what this does, this then allows this to be a solid piece as a protective to not allow anything to come from inside, outside, outside, inside, so forth. So you got to make sure this is long enough to fit there. I have done that, and it does fit there just fine right over the top of that. You now need to make the appropriate length of your lines. I can get this up here, maybe show you a little better here. Appropriate length of your lines. This copper line, this is your ground line, actually is going to go up, then wrap around this ground screw here. So we're going to go ahead and cut that off, because I won't need that much of that. This is all grounded into this ground that's down here. So we're going to get that wrapped around there first. And once that's wrapped around, you can go ahead and screw that down on there. And that'll lock the ground into this plate, which is tied into this bottom plate, which is tied into the ground on the actual unit. And then you've got your black and your white lines. We're going to connect those in here in black, and the white's going to go to the red. So we're going to get those cooked in there. So I'll need to cut these down a little bit because I won't need this much of the line. Leave yourself enough, obviously, that you can strip it out and get it connected in. And then we're going to go ahead and tie them in with these pieces here. Now this little piece here is a little new to me. We're going to go ahead and strip these and tie them in too. Most water heaters do not have this little light gauge wire. It may be something that they're starting to add to some of these higher end water heaters, but this is the first one I've seen that has this. I actually had to look it up and try to figure out exactly what it even did. But apparently it goes to a little breaker piece that's in here that if there's ever any deficiencies in the electric as it has a problem, that it'll go ahead and signal the machine the appropriate methods to do so that it doesn't damage the machine. Ready to go. And you're going to have some, no pun intended here, big nuts to go on the end of these. So make sure you've got the right gauge wire nut that's meant for this size of wire. So now that's all tied in. So now we can go ahead and take these and poke all this little wire down into here. And this will be a little bit of a challenge. It's never real fun to try to get all this back in there, but it's got to get done so that you can be safe and get everything poked back in there. And then we're going to go ahead and screw the top of it back on. Once you get it all shoved back down in there like that, then you can go ahead and then screw back down the top of this. I've got to get it, it actually goes underneath this a little bit, and those holes will line up. And then these little screws will screw on the top, and that will seal everything down. And then I'll go ahead and tuck this along the top of this down, and we'll plug this in, hit the breaker, and run through some settings, test her out. Currently I have it set to 125 degrees, and I've got it Wi-Fi attached by using this EcoNet, which is used through Rheem. The water heater is currently heating up right now, but I wanted to scroll through a couple of settings to show you what this is capable of doing. Again, if you hit next on this button here, it asks you, do you want the alarm to beep? You can select yes or no. Temperature display can be done between Fahrenheit or Celsius. We're going to leave it on Fahrenheit here in the United States. It shows there's no current alarms. Alarm history. You can clear the history if it did have an alarm. That has to do with your internet. It shows your MAC address. Network information there. And SOV installed, it says no. This particular one did not come with a shut-off valve, or SOV as they called it on here, shut-off valve. You can get one that you can install and plug in that basically will detect if there's water standing in the pan it can automatically shut off the water to the system so that it does not continue to leak out. I do not have that in there. So it's got a few settings on there, and then you've also got your mode setting that'll let you go between eco mode, there's a electric only mode, which it currently is in now, a standard mode that uses the heat pump, etc. So it's got some other modes that you can go through there, and then of course just adjusts the temperature. And you could do all of this using this app, which is easier if you're sitting upstairs or something than having to come down and physically change it on this. The app's kind of fun because it shows how much water or hot water is actually left in the system. I hope you've enjoyed this little tutorial about how to install our hybrid electric water heater in lieu of our gas one. I will mention a couple of quick things. One is that when the compressor part of this is running, it does have a little bit of a noise to it. It's a fan noise that runs, kind of like your air conditioner, only quieter because it's small. It doesn't seem to bother us because when the door is closed, we've gone to adjacent rooms. I was concerned I'd be able to hear it, and I really don't. So that isn't really an issue. The one thing that might become an issue is the fact that because we've installed this in a smaller space instead of a garage or a larger basement room, this compressor does blow out some pretty cold air. So it actually takes the heat out of the air, and that's what's helping heat the water. And so because it's a confined space, it's getting this room a lot colder than I anticipated that it would do that. Now they do sell a little shroud that goes over the outside of this that will allow me to duct that into this hole up here, and I'm going to be doing that. I don't have that with me right now, so I've got it currently just set to electric mode only, so it's using the two heating elements to heat the water. That'll be fine for now, but to get the maximum efficiency out of this hybrid, I'm going to need to get that shroud in place so that I can set it to eco mode, and that will primarily use this to heat the water to save us even more money. Again, hope you found this helpful. If you did, please feel free to like and subscribe, and we'll see you again next time.